Yes, Hannah, you had a question?
Yeah. I have a question for Thomas. That was really neat to look at your two examples. Very, very interesting stuff. One thing I noticed in the clip of the film is that the hand gestures actually don't immediately start as anger. They seem to start as grief gestures, where people are kind of clutching at their clothes. And one guy grabs his hat. So it's almost a fist. I think it is. But it's not a fist of anger. It's a clutch of grief. And so I wonder if you could maybe talk about the transition from one set of gestures to another, because it doesn't start as anger. It's like grief is the springboard within the hand gestures. At least that's what I thought I saw. Any ideas?
I think that's a perfectly fitting observation. I think so too. And maybe that's, I would say, part of Eisenstein's mastery, right? So that he doesn't just suddenly confront us with people that are angry, in this evolutionary sense, but that he actually manages to make some kind of a smooth transition, just like the way you pointed out. But first of all, the guy grabs his hat and he moves his hands like this. And you don't actually really know, is it because of grief, or is he maybe starting to feel angry about the death of this soldier? And from this kind of ambivalent situation, the later
Thomas, we don't see you. Can you turn on the camera?
My camera is on.
Oh, we don't see you.
I have turned on. You want to exit the room and come back?
Oh, don't worry.
Okay, so we can hear you in any case.
Well, it says my camera is on, so I don't know what I could do. Maybe I can just answer Hannah's question and then jump out and jump back in again. So maybe then Serge can answer a question in between. So what I was about to say is, yeah, Hannah, it's a perfectly fitting observation, and I think it's part of Eisenstein's mastery that he makes this smooth transition, because the later clenched fists are clearly clenched in rage. So yeah, just thanks for pointing that out, and I think Eisenstein does a really good job. And maybe that's actually important, because if he would confront us with clenched fists just from the get-go, we wouldn't maybe be able to just realize what's actually going on. And because Eisenstein does it the way he does it, it feels kind of natural to follow along from grief to rage. So thanks. And then I'm just quickly jumping out and back in again. See you in a second.
I'm the next on the question list, but there is somebody else who wants to ask a question before me, please. Okay, it's a question from Thomas. You made an analogy between James Lange on the one hand and Lipps on this second hand, on the question of emotion and gesture and its impact on the aesthetics of Eisenstein. So I think the epistemological approach is quite different in both cases. In the case of James and Lange, the approach is clearly reductionist, and it's a fact of explaining emotions as emergent properties, which can be reduced to a physiological anatomical process. And in Lipps, within the framework of this theory of empathy, a gesture is really considered as a symptom, as a mark that can be recognized by the seer and interpreted as something expressing an emotion. So there is an experiential dimension that you don't find in the case of James and Lange. I think, according to me, it's a quite huge difference between reductionist materialist interpretation in the case of Lange and James on one hand, and a much more experiential mentalistic approach in the case of Lipps, with different roles in the empathetic process. But could you please comment? I come back on this issue in Eisenstein. Do you hear me?
Sorry, David, this is a question for me.
Yes, it was a question to you.
Oh my, that's so unlucky because I just jumped
Sorry,
out and jumped back in again,
this
so I
was a
just
sound
caught the
problem.
last. Can you just sum up your question? I didn't hear it because I tried to reload.
You made an analogy between Lange and James on the one hand and Lips on the other hand on gesture and emotions. In both cases, the approach is epistemology quite different. It's a quite reductionistic approach in the case of James Lange. Emotions are an emergent process which can be reduced to physiology and anatomal physiological processes. But in the case of Lips, the gesture is really envisioned as a symptom, as a visible mark, which is interpreted by the seer. And this is something that produces the empathization with the gesture. So there is an experiential and perceptual aspect in Lips, which is not present in the James Lange theory. At least it's my interpretation.
Thanks for pointing that out, David. I think that's true, and there are more differences, right? Because for Lips, it's not important for empathy if you actually move your fist, right? So the actual bodily mimicry is not important for Lips. It's just a tendency to have that we have to do that. While for James, it actually matters. So there are lots of differences, and I didn't really talk about those. Why didn't I do that? Well, because Eisenstein really doesn't follow along in this level of detail, at least what I got from him, right? So he just gets this basic idea, and this is what he tries to work with, right? So he's no philosopher, as I already said. Same is true for Rilke, by the way. And he doesn't immerse himself in the theories in this level of detail like you did, for example. So for him, it's fine. So we tend to mimic the gestures, and this tends to kind of turn up the affect level to 11. And this is what he's interested. This is what he's interested in. So that's what.
Okay, thank you very much. I would have many other questions, but time is running. Vittorio is next. Please, Vittorio.
Yeah, if I may jump in, this discussion about the direction in terms of James Lange, so the physiology produces the feeling, or its reversal following the critique of James Lange theory put forward by Cannon and Bard. Perhaps there is a third approach, which I see to be consistent with some new empirical data in cognitive neuroscience, which comes from a pupil of Karl Stumpf, who nevertheless decided not to follow the philosophical path, but to become a novel writer. And his name is Robert Musil. And in the Galilei Proof of 1938, there are about 100 pages, emotional psychology, so-called designated, which I'll quote at the end of my talk, where a third possible way to go is to claim that emotions are intentional, they are defined by the objects, and I think he was influenced by Kurt Lewin, the Gestalt psychologist, in that respect. So the action and the expression of the emotion are one thing with the experience. And there are recent data obtained by colleagues in Milan from the Parma group, who stimulated the anterior cingulate cortex of epileptic patients, inducing the experience and the expression of laughter and merriment. But if you record from those same brain area submitting to the patient the observation of someone laughing, you obtain an activation of the same part of the brain. So the same part of the brain can produce the expression of the emotion, but underpins also its experience. And so this third way can somehow sort out the dichotomous account of emotion cognitive neuroscience struggling with in the last 70 years or so. Just a contribution for the discussion.
Yeah, just thanks, Vittorio. Especially interesting because Lipps himself was followed Karl Stumpf on his chair for systematic philosophy, so the connections are everywhere. Yeah.
I have a connection problem. Do you hear me? Okay. So
Yes.
it's finished with
I
the.
think,
I guess. Sorry. There were interruptions.
Yeah.
Okay, and now it's Grazia Pulvirenti. Grazia, please. Sorry for the technical problems.
No problem. Thank you, Thomas. I very much enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks.
And I have a question about the Dinggedicht. So this attempt by Rilke to create a kind of poems in which the subject, the poet, is absent. You said that in some way this was a way to contrast Einfühlung. But my idea is slightly different because what I think is that it is such a deep Einfühlung process in the object that allows him to give the object the agency and to let the agency become the actant instance of the poem. And in order to confer the agency to the object, I think the poet has to have so deeply empathized with what he imagines, of course, to be the qualities of the object or the animal, like in case of the panther, so that he can represent the world through the eyes of the panther and not through a human perspective. I think that just like the Hortensia, also the example of the panther gives us the measure of a kind of empathization process in which the subject cancel his own individuality, having reached not an imagined state of the mind of the animal, for instance, but the movement that the animal is doing, and through this movement he can represent another kind of view of the world, which is completely different from the human one. So I was just wondering. Thank you.
That sounds really interesting and plausible to me, right? So maybe we should imagine it as some kind of step-by-step process, right? So Rilke starts out as hearing about Einfühlung, and in the Lippsian sense, we project our own emotions into the object of our contemplation. And then he thinks, well, that's not what I'm interested in. And there in stage 2, so to speak, maybe one could place this quote from the letter to Magda von Hattenberg, where he says, no, I don't want to just see the dog as a window to the human in the dog. This is not what I'm after. And then comes step 3, and that's what you suggested, right? So Rilke is not content with these step 1 and step 2, and then he tries to empathize in a way that makes the empathizing subject, so to speak, dissolve in the panther or the hydrangea, right? So I don't know how that's actually supposed to work. That seems very difficult, and it's a metaphorical way of speaking, first and foremost, to dissolve in the object of contemplation. But that's what he's after. I think you're perfectly right there. And the thing, poetry, the Dinggedichte are his way of trying to achieve the kind of all-encompassing empathy that you suggested, I think. So,
okay.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for this suggestion. Maybe
So thank you very much. Thank you very much to our both speakers.